Hello folks, I hope you're having a great day today. Hey, today I want to kick off the beginning of my sort of October special where we're taking a deep dive sort of into H.P. Lovecraft, the Cthulhu Mythos, and some of the other writers that did the Cthulhu Mythos later on in the month. So what I'm doing for you folks is I'm going to be doing basically a horror story every other day and so forth. I'm going to be recording them all in basically one giant Saturday right now as we enter the month. Then I'm going to be doing basically one short story or novella for you every other day until we knock out a whole bunch of the Cthulhu Mythos and so forth. As you can tell by any look from my library and so forth, I have a lot of Cthulhu stuff, Lovecraft stuff and so forth on my libraries and so forth. He's obviously somebody who's been canonized as a classic writer. Many people would say he's probably the greatest English horror writer of the last century, with Poe being the greatest horror writer the century prior and so forth. But he's one of the best out there. He's got tons of books out there, tons of works out there, tons of collections out there. He's heavily canonized, heavily read, and one of the most influential voices of his day, and in horror specifically. Although he wrote science fiction fantasy too. His fantasy stuff tended to be more in sort of this dream cycle stuff that sort of evoked previous writers like Lord Dunsany and so forth. And he also has some science fiction horror stuff too. Today what I want to do is take a look at Call of Cthulhu, which is the first story that begins the Cthulhu Mythos. In this story, Lovecraft, I think, basically, it's written in the late 20s and so forth, and it's really kind of, I think, where Lovecraft finds his voice as himself. He'll famously say, hey, I wrote a lot of Poe-inspired stuff early on, and then a lot of Dunsany-inspired stuff, and so forth. And then I think this is basically where he kind of figures out where his own voice is. And you can get a feel from the very first paragraph of Call of Cthulhu that he has pushed horror past basically where it was beforehand, where many of the famous horror works before now were dealing with being chased by a werewolf, or you and your friends fighting against Dracula in London and so forth. There were more of these low-level type things. I'm trying to deal with my own survival. I'm trying to deal with my own, I'm trying to push off something that's deep and dark. I'm being haunted by a ghost. I'm being, and so forth. And these basic sort of smaller scale levels. And what Lovecraft does is he kind of takes this higher level view, and nobody likes you. Nobody cares for you. We are insignificant. We are tiny, tiny little things in the universe. And as soon as we realize just how dark and deep and things really are, we're going to go mad. We're going to run back into the Dark Age and go hiding, because that's going to be the only way we're going to survive, is by seeing those things. He actually starts out his very first paragraph where the Call of Cthulhu is going to set the stage for the Cthulhu Mythos and so forth, and that these are these great and dark beings. Now, the Call of Cthulhu is still a little uneven at times and so forth. We'll take a look at it here in a moment, but it's heavily influential. It's one of the classics of the era. It's one of the horror classics and so forth. So it's important for us to take a look at it as a part of this channel that cares about sort of these classics from fantasy, science fiction, and horror. And so forth. And obviously the Call of Cthulhu is definitely, from the late 20s, is definitely one of these stories. So we're going to take a look at it. Now, Call of Cthulhu is going to be a longer story, and basically there's going to be a connecting story where you have these people that are trying to track down these various stories and so forth from this bas relief that's found and this dreams that were being held and so forth. And they're going to be basically going to a few different places in order to track down what's been happening, why people are having these dreams, why people are going a little crazy, what's actually been happening behind the scenes, and so forth. And so that's basically what's going to happen is you're going to have these people that are going to head out and so forth. So I'm going to give you a basic little review, and then I'm going to move off because I want to give you an opportunity to read it, and I'll give you a link below, because I try to keep my reviews spoiler-free, and only the opening part. But basically, again, you're going to have these people find this bas relief, and so forth, and some dreams are happening that are particularly dark and disquieting, and these dreams are being recorded around the world at the same time, and so forth. And while they're trying to find out what's happening, basically they're going to head down to New Orleans, meet up with this private investigator who is investigating some things that are happening down there. Down there they're going to find this statue, learn more about this cult that's happening down there, and so forth, that's happening by some locals down in New Orleans. They're also going to learn more about some stuff that was happening in Antarctica too, and so forth. And there's, I'm sorry, not Antarctica, Greenland. I'm sorry. That's happening in Greenland too. And there's going to be some locals that were happening there, stories. They're going to follow some information on a story that happened over in Greenland from some local natives too. And then finally, they're going to do a quest, and they're going to head out, and they're going to find this journal by this person who's written by this guy from Norway, and he's going to be talking about his sort of adventures out in the seas, in the Atlantic, and so forth. And you're going to find more and more and more information about the main character Cthulhu, the place that he is captured under the waters in the Atlantic. That's called R''Elia. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm just going to assume it's R'lia or something like that. It's intentionally, I'm sure, intentionally not to be pronounceable by the human tongue in English and so forth, intentionally by the writer and so forth. But for lack of a better word, I'm just going to pronounce it R'lia, move on. But he's in this dreaming city and so forth. And there's a lot of these sort of evocative things that are going to happen over the course of the story. Dreams are going to happen. More and more information is going to be found out about Cthulhu, the people that worship Cthulhu, the statue that's in the bas relief and so forth. So you're going to get more and more of an actual physical portrayal of what Cthulhu looks like, and so forth. And then you'll actually encounter Cthulhu by the time you're done. So you get a chance to actually get a feel for what Cthulhu looks like in reality and so forth. Now that's, again, the review. I'm going to kind of set it aside because, again, I want to give you a chance. If you're interested in kind of tracking it and so forth, I'll link you to it in the comments below. But there is kind of a good opportunity to kind of get a feel for where we are and so forth with this story. Now, Call of Cthulhu is a little bit longer. It's about 35-40 pages. In most of the places that I have it anthologized, like this as an example. It's one of the earlier stories. This is a collection that was published by Del Rey and so forth. And there's a lot of sort of high-profile collections that you can get out there. It's been published. Most of Lovecraft stuff now is free. The IP on it is no longer held, and so forth. So it's now free for people to head on out there. So you can probably find it places like Project Gutenberg, Dagon Bytes, and some other places easily. It's also been published in places like there's an RPG called the Call of Cthulhu that's published in the core book to get you a feel for what the world looks like and so forth. And it obviously started the Cthulhu Mythos in a major way. So this is a story that you should read if you haven't read it. Again, it's 40 pages long. It'll take you about an hour or so to read it and so forth. But in it, you're going to get a real strong feel for the world, for this sense of cosmic indifference that Lovecraft creates, that you're going to get a feel for. And you're going to also get a chance to see what horror is like on a cosmic scale rather than a small, little scale. That the little horror stuff that happened beforehand, basically Lovecraft's going to toss that out and say, okay, now let's really look at what real horror's like. And when you realize that all these different things are happening at the same time, there's this worldwide cult, this worldwide group of followers, a worldwide thing is happening right now as Cthulhu is moving out and so forth, and all these different things are happening, all these different people that are being connected from New England, New Orleans, Greenland, and Scandinavia, the seas in the Atlantic and so forth, and the rising island. All these different things that are happening. And all these places around the world, and you get to see how worldwide this phenomenon is and how many things are happening and how they're all interconnected. And it's really fun, and I hope that you'll enjoy it. It's got a sense of this cosmic wonder to it as a result. That's in addition to this sort of horror, there's also a little bit of sense of wonder too, that there's all these things that are happening and so forth. And you'll get Cthulhu being described, and the places that are being described in sort of a typical Lovecraftian style. He's going to use words like cyclopean, which means large, and so forth. He does have a little bit of purplish prose to it. But it's a strong story. Again, it's one of his first Cthulhu Mythos stories and so forth. But I do kind of think this is where he starts to hit his writing. Is going to really start, I think, hitting it out of the park most of the time from about here on, and so forth. So for the next 10 years or so until he dies in 37, he's going to be really, really strong at writing. And in fact, what I'm going to do is as soon as I finish this, I'm actually going to hit the stop button. I'm actually going to start. I'm going to do 4 more reviews for you. I'm going to publish them and so forth. I'm taking a Saturday out and so forth. And I'm going to knock out the next few: Shadow over Innsmouth, Dunwich Horror, At the Mountains of Madness, and The Color Out of Space. So you get a chance to get 5 different stories from Lovecraft that are all sort of some of his highest in the Cthulhu Mythos. This is such a strong, such an influential story. You really should read it and so forth. So I'll stop it and set it aside and so forth, and just kind of leave it there for you. It is one of my 5 favorite Cthulhu Mythos stories by Lovecraft, although it's probably more like my 3rd or 4th than it is my number 1. And so forth, but it's a very strong story, and you definitely are going to want to read it and so forth. And it's going to kick off basically my Cthulhu Mythos October for you. So alrighty, there you are. Have you read it? I'd love to talk to you about it more if you have some specific questions or some specific things. Now I do want to point out that this is also, because you're going to places like Greenland and some other places, this is one of the... Lovecraft can be a little... isn't always his racism of his era isn't always obvious. Pretty much everybody's in a bad place and so forth. And he'll have degenerates in New England just as much as he'll have degenerates in Greenland or in New Orleans and so forth. But his description specifically of some of the degenerates in Greenland and so forth has some racial overtones to them that are very uncomfortable for somebody who's going back for him, just so you're aware of them going into it. That's not uncommon for people of the era. Lovecraft certainly has that. It's not as big with the Lovecraft writings as it is in some of the other writings that are happening during the Polar Era too. And he's kind of open biased in that white societies. You'll see this in the next story where you go to Innsmouth are just as inbred, just as issue heavy and so forth. He kind of sees kind of an equal opportunity when it comes to those sorts of things, but still very difficult descriptions at times, particularly for the Greenland descriptions of the natives there and such. So, just so you're aware, going into it sort of an eyes wide open. But there you are. And again, I'm happy to talk with you more about it in the comments below, or engage you with it, with the story. If you have any questions or want to talk about it more, if you disagree or agree with me, I'd also be happy to engage you with that too in the comments below. If you like this video, there's no reason not to hit that subscribe button. There's going to be so many more reviews and similar videos to follow. You might as well go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can follow them along. And then finally, hey, if you took some time out of your day to watch this video, I want to thank you. We all have busy days, busy lives. So the fact that you took some time out of your day to spend with me, that's something very humbling, and I appreciate that. So thanks.